They tried to erase her, scratched her face off monuments, burned her name from royal records, turned her into a phantom queen who never existed. And for almost 2,000 years it worked. Until 1926, when archaeologists digging in Turkey uncovered a puzzling set of bones. Bones that told a story Egypt wanted buried. Bones that whispered of betrayal, blood, and a murder so personal Cleopatra herself may have ordered it. By the end of this video you'll understand 3 disturbing truths historians rarely say out loud. How a teenage girl nearly stole the throne from Cleopatra herself. Why Julius Caesar's victory parade in Rome horrified the public so badly that the Senate changed their laws. And what forensic evidence uncovered about Arsinoe's final moments. Evidence that proves she was stalked, cornered, and killed like a hunted animal. Before we go deeper into this dark chapter of ancient history, if you want real stories, the kind schools refuse to teach, hit the subscribe button right now. Because this one only gets darker from here. You need to understand something about Cleopatra's family before the real nightmare begins. The Ptolemies didn't rule Egypt like a dynasty. They ruled it like a war zone. Their royal tradition wasn't elegance or scholarship or diplomacy. It was murder. For 3 centuries brothers killed brothers. Mothers poisoned their own sons. Wives strangled husbands at dinner. If Game of Thrones feels brutal, the Ptolemies made it look like a family picnic. Cleopatra VII, the Cleopatra, grew up knowing that her siblings weren't companions. They were threats. She had 3 siblings who wanted her dead. But only one of them would become her greatest enemy. Her brothers were easy enough to remove. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during the Civil War. Ptolemy XIV was quietly poisoned, almost certainly on Cleopatra's orders. But the sister? The sister was different. Arsinoe IV wasn't a spoiled princess waiting for jewels. She wasn't content to play court games or live in Cleopatra's shadow. Arsinoe was sharp, ambitious, relentless, and according to Julius Caesar's own battlefield reports, she had the mind of a born commander. While Cleopatra seduced Rome's most powerful men to secure her throne, Arsinoe believed she could take Egypt by force. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. She almost succeeded. Cleopatra spent decades trying to erase Arsinoe, chiseling her name off temple walls, wiping her face from statues, ordering scribes to rewrite royal history. This kind of erasure required enormous political power and years of effort. Why go through all that trouble? Because Arsinoe was the greatest threat Cleopatra ever faced. Not Rome. Not Caesar. Not Antony. Her own sister. Arsinoe represented a dangerous truth. Cleopatra wasn't the only brilliant woman in the Ptolemaic dynasty. She may not have even been the best. By 48 BCE, the rivalry exploded into something the world had never seen. 2 royal sisters fighting for Egypt's throne with Rome trapped in the middle. Picture this. It's 48 BC. Julius Caesar has just arrived in Alexandria, expecting to settle a petty royal dispute and claim Egypt as a Roman ally. But instead of obedience, he walks into chaos. Cleopatra is on the run, forced into exile by her own brother's faction. The royal palace is surrounded by hostile forces. And Caesar, the most feared general alive, is trapped in a city he thought he would conquer in a week. And the mastermind behind this crisis is not Cleopatra. It's Arsinoe. A girl barely old enough to vote by modern standards. Ancient sources disagree on her exact age, placing her anywhere between 15 and 18. But they all agree on one thing. She was commanding an army of 20,000 Egyptians. Let that sink in. A teenager, leading veterans of Egypt's military, against the greatest tactician Rome had ever produced. And she wasn't losing. Arsinoe's forces cut off Caesar's supply lines, blocked every major approach to the palace, and even gained control of parts of the harbor, effectively trapping Caesar inside the city. The move that shook historians the most? She set fire to the ships in Alexandria's port. The flames spread so fast they ignited parts of the legendary Library of Alexandria. Scrolls holding thousands of years of knowledge turned to ash in minutes. Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon and rewritten the map of Europe, was now writing frantic letters begging for reinforcements. This wasn't luck. This wasn't rebellion. This was strategy. In the Alexandrian War, Caesar himself describes Arsinoe as a real threat, a capable commander, a quick thinker, a strategist who understood siege warfare. Her top general, Ganymedes, executed naval maneuvers so complex that Rome's Mediterranean fleet nearly got trapped. Meanwhile, Cleopatra, desperate and powerless, hid in Egypt's eastern desert. She had to be smuggled across enemy lines, rolled up inside a rug, just to reach Caesar's hiding place. So imagine how it must have felt for her. Her younger sister, a girl nearly half her age, was doing what Cleopatra never could, fighting Rome head-on, and winning. The siege stretched on for months. Arsinoe's forces used fire ships to attack Roman positions. They diverted seawater into the Roman wells, contaminating every source of drinking water. Caesar's men resorted to sipping brackish, nearly undrinkable water while Arsinoe's army controlled every freshwater spring. At one point, the situation became so desperate that Caesar himself had to swim for his life. When Arsinoe's soldiers overwhelmed his position near the Heptastadium Causeway, Caesar, to avoid capture, jumped into the harbor and swam toward a friendly ship, holding his cloak and documents above the water with one hand. The conqueror of Gaul, dog-paddling away from a teenage girl's army. But everything changed in March of 47 BCE. Caesar's reinforcements finally arrived, fresh legions marching from Syria and Asia Minor. Arsinoe's exhausted forces couldn't withstand the renewed Roman assault. At the Battle of the Canopic Gate, 20,000 Egyptians clashed with Rome's finest soldiers for 3 brutal hours. And this battle, this moment, would decide the fate of Arsinoe IV, and Egypt itself. When the dust finally settled on the Canopic Gate, the tide of battle had turned into a funeral pyre for Arsinoe's hopes. Her army, once a wall between Caesar and domination, lay broken. Standards trampled. Spears snapped like twigs. The teenage commander who had dared to choke Rome itself was captured, not on the battlefield in glorious defeat, but like a hunted animal dragged from the woods. It should have ended there. Execution, spectacle, the satisfied roar of an empire claiming retribution. Rome had made a ritual of such displays. Captured kings paraded, enemies strangled at the end of the triumphal procession. The city taught anew the cost of defiance. But Arsinoe's fate took a turn nobody in the Forum expected. September 46 BCE, the city of Rome swelled for the greatest triumph any man had staged. Julius Caesar, riding the momentum of victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa, planned a pageant massive enough to be a religion unto itself. Captured monarchs, wagons of seized treasure, exotic beasts, and a glitter of crowns, Plutarch says 2,822 of them, were to march the streets in a single crushing lesson of power. Arsinoe walked in that procession wearing golden chains. She was between 16 and 19, a young woman, not a titanic general. She did not stride like a queen defiant in defeat. She stumbled under the weight of ropes and the courtly choreography of humiliation. And then something unexpected happened. The crowd, conditioned to jeers and blood, found themselves staring at a child more than an enemy. Mothers in the audience recognized a daughter. Old men saw a sister. The brutal calculus that had justified countless executions faltered under a new human emotion, pity. Caesar saw this. He also saw political risk. Letting Rome's people watch a sobbing teenage prisoner strangled at the end of his parade could turn triumph into scandal, sympathy into political ammunition for his enemies. So he made a choice that would haunt him politically for years. He spared Arsinoe. Spared but not freed. Caesar banished her to Ephesus, not to a prison, but to a gilded cage beneath the protective shadow of the Temple of Artemis, one of the wonders of the ancient world. There she lived under sacred asylum rites, a figurehead of mercy on Rome's ledger. She slept under the roofs of pilgrims and supplicants. She choked down exile in a city far from the Nile. In theory, the temple's protection made her untouchable. In practice, it made her a living relic, powerless, isolated, watched. To many Romans, Caesar's clemency smacked of weakness. Dio Cassius later wrote that critics accused him of softening, corrupted by Eastern charm, or the whisper went by Cleopatra's influence. But Caesar had calculation behind his mercy. Sparing Arsinoe turned a dangerous rebel into an object of controlled pity, neutralized a political threat without martyring her in the public square. History, however, is full of debts unpaid. 5 years of exile did not equal oblivion. Arsinoe's name, though scrubbed from Egyptian monuments, persisted in the rumor corridors of power. Cleopatra never forgot. Power corrodes and obsession binds. By 41 BCE, Cleopatra had secured a new Roman ally, Mark Antony. Their meeting in Tarsus would become legend, Cleopatra arriving on a golden barge, a living goddess. But while history romanticizes the spectacle, a darker conversation took place behind the silk. This woman, Cleopatra, still listed one casualty she insisted upon: Arsinoe. According to Josephus and other sources, Cleopatra's request was blunt: find Arsinoe and end her life. For 5 long years Arsinoe had posed no army, no claim, no political threat. She was a supplicant beneath Artemis' roof, but she was also a living symbol that Cleopatra's rivals could inspire resistance. That symbol had to be extinguished. Mark Antony obliged. He sent men to Ephesus with a mandate that ignored international custom and sacred law. The Temple of Artemis enjoyed asylum rights that were treated as inviolable across the Mediterranean. To violate them was not merely a crime, it was sacrilege. The temples were neutral grounds. Attacking someone there was an act that could destabilize entire networks of diplomacy and religion. The assassins did not care. They broke into the sanctuary, dragged Arsinoe from the sanctified precincts, and executed her upon the temple steps. Josephus records the act tersely: she was seized and killed. The method is not described in detail. The ancient writers were careful, perhaps shocked at the desecration more than the mechanism. But the image is plain and brutal: a throne of worship turned into a stage for murder. The consequences were immediate and corrosive. Killing a protected supplicant unmasked the reach of royal vengeance. Cleopatra had not merely removed an inconvenient rival, she had shattered a covenant of sanctuary respected across empires. The act broadcast a new truth: Egyptian politics would tolerate no exile, no legal protection, not even the religious immunity of a world wonder, if the queen wanted you dead. Arsinoe's death should have been the final word. Instead, it became a rumor that refused to die. For decades the story existed in whispers, malice, and redacted records. Cleopatra worked ruthlessly to scrub her sister from official memory, chiseling inscriptions, defacing statues, negotiating with priests. But memory is stubborn and dirt finds a way to the surface. That dirt came to light in 1926 when archaeologists unearthed human remains in modern-day Turkey, bones that bore the scars and stories of violence. Forensic scientists later examined those remains and found evidence consistent with a violent end: trauma, perimortem lesions, traces that suggested chasing, catching, and finishing. The bones told a story consistent with an assassination that violated sanctuary, an execution carried out with the cold intent of erasure. But bones whisper, they do not speak with names. So historians piece together motive, method, and meaning from scattered testimony. What emerges is not just the death of a failed rebel, but the anatomy of power: how empires stage mercy for politics, how spectacle can be weaponized, and how sanctuary can be bought away by influence and brutality. Arsinoe's life and death teach a painful lesson. Empires may make laws and temples may offer protection, but in the end raw political will can rewrite both. A girl who once commanded ships and fire was reduced to ashes in the memory of the world, not because she failed in battle, but because those in power decided she must vanish. Her bones, unearthed centuries later, demanded a reckoning the official histories could no longer fully deny. They proved in cold detail what propaganda had tried to erase: that Arsinoe was hunted, captured, and murdered, and that the sanctuary meant to protect her had been deliberately torn away. History can be beautiful when it records triumph. It can be honest when it admits defeat. But when power needs a clean slate, history is often the first thing burned. Stabbing, strangulation, poison. Ancient historians floated every possibility for Arsinoe's death, but one detail rose above the rest: the violation of sacred ground. It was so shocking, so brazen, that Josephus doesn't bury it in flowery language. He calls it what it was: a symbol of Mark Antony's lawlessness, a moment when politics crossed a red line carved not by men but by gods. Picture the scene. Arsinoe, barely past childhood, sees soldiers entering the sacred courtyard. She doesn't need to ask who sent them. She knows the signature of Cleopatra's fear. She knows who has waited 5 years for her heart to stop beating. She runs. Not to guards, not to sanctuary priests, but to the altar itself. The heart of the Temple of Artemis. The one place where every empire, even Rome, had sworn never to spill blood. The priests scream. Worshippers drop to their knees. And Arsinoe presses her hands against holy stone, begging the gods to enforce the law men refused to obey. The soldiers kill her anyway. No trial. No ceremony. No pretense. Just steel crossing sacred borders to silence a girl who had once challenged an empire. This was not justice. Not politics. Not a calculated Roman execution. It was personal. Cleopatra had won everything. The throne, Caesar's loyalty, Antony's devotion, Egypt's future. Yet she still could not tolerate the idea of her sister breathing the same air. Power can forgive many threats. Family can forgive none. Antony faced no consequences. Neither did Cleopatra. The world barely blinked. Arsinoe's death became a footnote, one line in Josephus, a whisper in Cassius Dio, a shadow in Plutarch. For nearly 2,000 years that was all we had. No tomb. No inscriptions. No body. Until 1926. That year, Austrian archaeologists digging near the Temple of Artemis uncovered something unusual, an octagonal tomb unlike anything else in the region. Inside lay the skeletal remains of a young woman, buried with care suggesting status. Someone important. Someone meant to be remembered. At first, no one dared to connect her with Arsinoe. The idea seemed too bold, too dramatic. So the tomb was catalogued. The bones were boxed. And the world moved on. But bones wait. Decades later, in 1990, the BBC commissioned a forensic investigation for a documentary. They brought in biological anthropologists, experts in ancient remains, trained to read stories written in fractures and marrow. What they found lit the historical world on fire. First revelation. The young woman died between 15 and 18 years old, far younger than historians believed Arsinoe had been at death. If this was Cleopatra's sister, it meant everything we knew had to be rewritten. She wasn't 20. She wasn't 25. She was barely old enough to be considered an adult. It meant she had commanded armies against Julius Caesar at 13 or 14. It meant she walked in Caesar's triumph not as a grown rebel, but as a terrified child. It meant assassins butchered a teenager on temple steps for the crime of surviving. Second revelation. Her skull showed unusual asymmetry, not a deformity but a genetic marker. Something seen in dynasties that practiced sibling marriage. Exactly like the Ptolemies. Not proof, no, but a breadcrumb pointing unmistakably toward Egyptian royalty. Third revelation. The bones showed signs of perimortem trauma, injuries inflicted at or near the time of death. Evidence of violence. Evidence that matched the story Josephus recorded but never detailed. Her end wasn't peaceful. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't merciful. It was force inflicted with urgency, the kind of brutality that leaves marks even after 2 millennia. But here's the twist that historians rarely discuss. While Cleopatra spent years erasing her sister, chiseling her name off monuments, scratching her face from temple inscriptions, burning her lineage from papyrus, the Romans, the very empire Arsinoe fought against, preserved her memory. Plutarch wrote about her dignity during Caesar's triumph. Cassius Dio debated whether sparing her was a mistake. Appian described her presence in the parade with detail. Josephus documented her killing as a warning against tyranny. The conquerors remembered her. Her own family tried to destroy her. Walk through any major museum today, the British Museum, the Louvre, the Met, and Cleopatra dominates every gallery. Coins, busts, statues, reliefs, amulets. Arsinoe is missing. Not lost. Not forgotten accidentally. Erased. Deliberately. Relentlessly. Violently. The Ptolemaic records we have show a systematic campaign. Her cartouches scratched out, her likeness dissolved, her titles removed. Cleopatra wanted her sister not merely dead, she wanted her unmade. But history has a long memory. And bones do not lie. Cleopatra won the throne. She won Caesar's alliance. She won Antony's devotion. She won Egypt. But she lost something bigger. History's judgment. Because today when people talk about Cleopatra they mention her beauty, her seduction, her political maneuvering, mostly Hollywood myths. But when they talk about the darkness beneath Egypt's final dynasty, they talk about the girl Cleopatra tried to erase. The teenage general. The prisoner who moved Rome to silence. The child murdered for being a reminder of what power fears most, competition. Arsinoe IV commanded armies before most modern teenagers finish middle school. She nearly defeated Julius Caesar, the greatest general Rome produced. She survived a Roman triumph with dignity that stunned an empire built on cruelty. She lived in exile for 5 years before dying on temple steps that should have protected her. History tried to bury her. But bones have their own voice. They tell us she wasn't erased because she was weak. She was erased because she was dangerous. Because sometimes the greatest threat to a ruler isn't the rival who might take their throne. It's the rival who might be remembered better than they are. Cleopatra ruled for 21 years and chose suicide over capture at age 39. She is remembered as Egypt's last pharaoh, a political seductress, a legend. But Arsinoe IV, the sister Cleopatra murdered, might have been something else entirely. More strategic. More competent. More disciplined. More deserving. So now the question is yours. Could Arsinoe IV have been a better ruler than Cleopatra? Not more famous. Not more glamorous. But better. Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you want more dark history they never teach in school, you already know what to do next.